The world has known many monsters. Names like Jack the Ripper and Ted Bundy echo through history. Among these infamous figures stands Andrei Chikatilo. Chikatilo, known as the Rostov Ripper, cast a long shadow over the Soviet Union. He preyed on the vulnerable, leaving behind a trail of bodies that shocked a nation. The Rostov Ripper's story is not for the faint of heart. This is a story about the investigation that brought him to justice. The name Andrei Chikatilo sends shivers down the spines of those familiar with his deeds. He became a boogeyman. Chikatilo was the embodiment of parents' worst nightmares. His crimes instilled fear in the hearts of people across the Soviet Union and beyond. Chikatilo's moniker, the Rostov Ripper, conjures up images of Jack the Ripper. Both men terrorized their respective communities. They left behind a trail of unsolved murders. The fear and uncertainty they generated were palpable. The comparison is not without merit. However, Chikatilo's reign of terror was far more extensive. It lasted far longer than that of his British counterpart. He claimed the lives of over 50 victims. His brutality knew no bounds. The details of his crimes are difficult to stomach. The Soviet Union, a nation known for its secrecy, tried to keep a lid on the case. However, the sheer number of victims and the brutality of the crimes made it impossible to ignore. The case became a national obsession. People were desperate for answers. They wanted to know who was behind these horrific acts. The story of Andrei Chikatilo is more than just a collection of gruesome facts. It's a complex tapestry woven from a troubled childhood. His story includes societal influences and the failings of a system ill-equipped to deal with such a predator. Born in 1936 in Ukraine, Chikatilo's early life was marked by hardship and upheaval. His formative years were overshadowed by the horrors of World War II. He experienced famine and witnessed atrocities that left an indelible mark on his psyche. These early experiences, while not excusing his actions, provide a glimpse into the development of a murderer. Was Chikatilo a product of his environment, or was he born evil? This is a question that has been debated by criminologists and psychologists alike. His case offers a unique opportunity to explore the factors that contribute to the creation of a serial killer. It is a journey into the darkest recesses of the human mind, a place where few dare to tread. By understanding Chikatilo, we can perhaps gain a better understanding of the monsters that lurk among us. We can be more vigilant in protecting the innocent. This is not just a story about Andrei Chikatilo. It is a story about the victims and their families. They were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Their stories are a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It is a story about the investigators who worked tirelessly to bring a monster to justice. They faced seemingly insurmountable odds. Investigators confronted their own demons in the process. The story of Andrei Chikatilo is a cautionary tale. It serves as a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance and the need for a justice system capable of dealing with even the most depraved individuals. This is an exploration of the dark side of humanity. It is an unflinching look at the mind of a serial killer. Buckle up and prepare yourself. We are about to descend into the abyss. Andrei Chikatilo's life began in a time of immense global turmoil. He was born in 1936 in Yablukny, a small village in Ukraine. This period was a time of great famine and political oppression in the Soviet Union. The shadow of Stalin's reign loomed large. These harsh realities cast a dark cloud over Chikatilo's early years. Adding to the family's struggles, World War II erupted when Andrei was just a young boy. The conflict brought unimaginable horrors to Ukraine. The tranquility of rural life was shattered by the invasion of Nazi forces. Villages became battlegrounds and families were torn apart. The war years left an indelible mark on Chikatilo's psyche. He witnessed atrocities that no child should ever have to see. The violence, the hunger, and the constant fear became ingrained in his developing mind. These experiences, though common to many in his generation, likely played a role in shaping his worldview and his capacity for empathy. While the exact details of his wartime experiences remain shrouded in some mystery, it's clear that they left him deeply scarred. The trauma he endured during these formative years likely contributed to the development of his deeply troubled personality. It's impossible to fully understand the monster he would become without acknowledging the brutal furnace in which his childhood was forged. Even as a young child, Andrei exhibited signs of social awkwardness and isolation. He was described as a shy and withdrawn boy. He struggled to connect with his peers. This isolation was compounded by a physical problem that caused him to wet the bed well into his adolescence. This humiliating condition further alienated him from others, deepening his sense of shame and inadequacy. At school, Andrei excelled academically, particularly in subjects like literature and history. He possessed a sharp mind and a thirst for knowledge. However, his academic achievements did little to improve his social standing. He remained an outsider, unable to bridge the gap between himself and his classmates. Some reports suggest that Andrei was the target of bullying during his school years. His slight build and timid nature made him an easy target for those seeking to assert their dominance. This bullying, if true, would have only served to exacerbate his feelings of insecurity and worthlessness. It may have fueled a simmering resentment that would later manifest itself in horrific ways. Whatever the exact circumstances, it's clear that Andrei's childhood was marked by a profound sense of loneliness and isolation. He lacked the emotional support and guidance that children need to develop healthy coping mechanisms. This lack of a stable support system, coupled with the traumas of his early life, created a fertile ground for darkness to take root. As Andrei entered adolescence, his feelings of inadequacy and sexual frustration intensified. He experienced his first sexual encounter at the age of 15, a fumbled and ultimately humiliating experience that left him deeply ashamed. This event, coupled with his ongoing bedwetting, solidified his feelings of being different, of being damaged. Around this time, a tragedy struck the family. Andrei's older brother disappeared, rumored to have been kidnapped and cannibalized during the war. While the details of this event remain murky, it undoubtedly had a profound impact on Andrei. The loss of a sibling, particularly under such horrific circumstances, would be traumatic for any child. It's impossible to say for sure what impact this event had on Andrei's psyche. Some speculate that it may have sparked a morbid fascination with violence and death. Others believe that it simply added another layer of trauma to an already troubled mind. Regardless of the specific impact, it's clear that this event was a significant one in Andrei's life. As Andrei grew older, his social awkwardness and inability to form meaningful relationships with women persisted. He craved intimacy, but lacked the social skills and self-confidence to achieve it. This frustration festered within him, growing into a dangerous resentment that would eventually find an outlet in the most horrific ways. Despite his social struggles, Andrei was determined to create a semblance of a normal life for himself. He pursued higher education, attending a university where he studied Russian literature and philology. He excelled in his studies, demonstrating a sharp intellect and a genuine love of learning. After graduating, Andrei worked a series of menial jobs, drifting from one town to another, never quite finding his place. His awkwardness and inability to maintain relationships followed him. He was seen as an outsider, a strange and unsettling presence by many who crossed his path. In 1963, under pressure from his family to settle down, Andrei entered into an arranged marriage with a woman named Faina. The marriage was, by all accounts, loveless and dysfunctional. Andrei struggled to perform sexually, plagued by impotence and feelings of inadequacy. This only served to reinforce his deep-seated insecurities and his belief that he was fundamentally flawed. Despite his difficulties, Andrei and Faina had 2 children, a son and a daughter. On the surface, he seemed to be living a normal, even mundane life. But beneath the facade of normalcy, a storm was brewing. Andrei's frustrations and dark impulses were growing stronger, threatening to erupt with devastating consequences. Andrei's career path took him into the field of education, a profession that would prove to be a disastrous fit for his troubled psyche. He worked as a teacher, first for younger children and later for teenagers. However, his tenure was marred by reports of inappropriate behavior. He was accused of molesting his students, both male and female. These incidents led to his dismissal from several teaching positions. His reputation as a predator spread, making it increasingly difficult for him to find work. The shame and humiliation of these experiences only fueled his anger and resentment. He felt like an outcast, rejected and scorned by society. As his professional life crumbled, so too did his marriage. His relationship with Faina deteriorated further, marked by constant arguments and a complete lack of intimacy. Andrei's impotence continued to plague him, a constant reminder of his perceived failings as a man. His frustrations mounted, finding an outlet in increasingly disturbing fantasies. By the late 1970s, Andrei Chikatilo was a man teetering on the edge of a precipice. He was a failed teacher, a failed husband, and a failure in his own eyes. His social awkwardness and inability to control his dark impulses had driven him to the fringes of society. The world in his mind had wronged him, and soon he would seek his revenge. Andrei Chikatilo's descent into a life of murder began with a single, horrific act. In 1978, he committed his first known murder. The victim was a 9-year-old girl named Yelena Zakotnova. This brutal killing set the stage for a long and gruesome series of murders. Chikatilo lured Yelena into an abandoned house, where he attacked her with a knife, stabbing her multiple times. The attack was frenzied and left the girl dead in a pool of blood. This first murder was not just a crime, it was a revelation for Chikatilo. He discovered a perverse satisfaction in the act of killing, a feeling that would drive him to repeat his heinous deeds. Chikatilo's choice of victims was far from random. His victims were typically young, ranging from children to teenagers, both male and female. They were often marginalized or vulnerable, making them easy targets. He preyed on those who were alone, offering food or money to lure them away. His background as a teacher and benign appearance helped him gain trust. This facade of normalcy was one of Chikatilo's most potent weapons. The act of murder became a macabre substitute for sexual satisfaction. Secluded spots like forests and train stations became his hunting grounds. His victim profile highlights the calculated and predatory nature of his crimes. Chikatilo's methodical approach to selecting and luring his victims was chillingly effective. He targeted bus and train stations, striking up disarming conversations to gain trust. Once a rapport was established, he led victims to secluded areas. His ability to read and manipulate people was key to his success. Alone with his victim, his demeanor changed, unleashing brutal attacks. The violence was swift, often involving stabbing or strangulation. Chikatilo chose isolated locations like forests and abandoned buildings. These places offered privacy for his horrific acts. His calculated approach allowed him to evade capture for over a decade. Chikatilo's blend of charm and brutality made him a deadly predator. For Chikatilo, killing was a ritualistic process that provided perverse satisfaction. He began with a sudden physical assault, followed by stabbing. The frenzied nature of his attacks indicated deep-seated rage. Victims often had dozens of stab wounds, showcasing excessive violence. Chikatilo engaged in acts of mutilation, removing body parts. These acts fulfilled his sadistic fantasies and exerted dominance. He believed the eyes contained the last image seen before death. Post-mortem, he arranged bodies in specific ways, maintaining control. His actions were driven by psychological needs, not financial gain. Each murder was a carefully orchestrated event to fulfill his darkest desires. After the murders, Chikatilo meticulously disposed of bodies to cover his tracks. He chose remote locations like forests and abandoned buildings. Bodies were often partially buried and covered with debris. He avoided leaving fingerprints or trace evidence, wearing gloves. Chikatilo maintained a facade of normalcy, blending into society. His double life allowed him to evade suspicion for years. Despite his efforts, the growing body count attracted law enforcement's attention. The lack of physical evidence made it difficult to build a case. Chikatilo's calculated disposal methods highlighted his cunning nature. His attention to detail allowed him to continue his spree for over a decade. Chikatilo's killings became more frequent and violent over the years. Each murder reinforced his sense of invincibility, leading to greater risks. The period between 1981 and 1990 saw a significant increase in victims. His attacks grew more brutal with severe injuries and mutilations. The violence was a way to exert power and fulfill dark fantasies. The growing body count drew widespread attention and fear. Soviet authorities launched a massive investigation under public pressure. Despite scrutiny, Chikatilo evaded capture, blending into society. His reign of terror ended in 1990, claiming over 50 victims. Chikatilo's case underscores the need for early detection and intervention. As the body count rose, fear gripped the Rostov region. Each new victim's discovery sent shockwaves through the community. The Soviet Union faced an unstoppable predator in its midst. Authorities faced mounting pressure to solve the case. The brutality of the murders, especially of children, sparked outrage. Lack of progress fueled speculation and rumors. Theories ranged from satanic cults to foreign conspiracies. People were afraid to let their children out of sight. Investigators faced immense pressure and frequent dead ends. The killer seemed to grow bolder, evading capture with alarming frequency. The investigation into the Rostov murders faced early challenges. The Soviet legal system was ill-equipped for such a crime. Limited resources and forensic technology hampered progress. A significant misstep was the wrongful conviction of Alexander Kravchenko. Kravchenko's execution delayed the investigation, allowing Chikatilo to continue. The closed society and lack of information sharing hindered efforts. Authorities were reluctant to release details, fearing panic. This secrecy made it difficult to enlist public help. Potential witnesses were unaware of the crime's extent. The investigation struggled to connect the dots and identify the killer. Authorities turned to psychiatrists and criminologists for answers. Led by Dr. Alexander Bukhanovsky, they developed a psychological profile. The profile depicted a highly organized, meticulous individual. The killer was likely of average intelligence and traveled for work. He had a deep understanding of human psychology to gain trust. The profile suggested a severe personality disorder, possibly sexual sadism. Killing was about inflicting pain and exerting control. Mutilations were deliberate, symbolic expressions of psychological needs. The profile faced resistance but proved remarkably accurate. Bukhanovsky's insights ultimately helped bring Chikatilo to justice. By the late 1980s, the investigation became the largest in Soviet history. Hundreds of investigators and thousands of interviews were conducted. New strategies included undercover agents and surveillance teams. Focus shifted to public transportation hubs where the killer stalked victims. Increased police presence yielded promising leads. Witnesses reported sightings of a suspicious man at train stations. Investigators documented every sighting, identifying patterns. The net tightened around Chikatilo, though he remained unaware. He continued to travel for work, blending in with crowds. Authorities, armed with new insights, were closing in on him. In the fall of 1990, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Larisa Tkachenko reported being approached by a man fitting the killer's description. She noted a distinctive detail. The man had a visible injury on one of his fingers. This detail proved crucial. The name Andrei Chikatilo emerged as a possible suspect. They placed Chikatilo under surveillance. The evidence was mounting, and the authorities were closing in. Months of meticulous surveillance yielded valuable intelligence about Chikatilo's movements. Investigators observed his routines and interactions. On November 20, 1990, plainclothes officers apprehended him near a train station. At the police station, Chikatilo initially denied any involvement. His demeanor betrayed a growing sense of unease. Investigators used psychological tactics and hard evidence to break through his facade. Dr. Bukhanovsky, the profiler, spoke to him as a patient, not a suspect. Over several days, Chikatilo confessed to 56 murders. The trial of Andrei Chikatilo began in April 1992 in the city of Rostov-on-Don. The eyes of the world were on the courtroom as the man accused of being one of the most prolific serial killers in history faced justice. The trial was a media spectacle, with journalists and observers from around the globe flocking to witness the proceedings. Inside the courtroom, Chikatilo's behavior was erratic and unsettling. He alternated between outbursts of rage, moments of tearful remorse, and periods of incoherent rambling. He claimed to be the victim of a conspiracy, a pawn in a larger game orchestrated by his enemies. At times he appeared to relish the attention, using the platform to air his grievances and espouse his twisted worldview. The prosecution, led by the determined Isa Kostoyev, presented a mountain of evidence against Chikatilo. They presented DNA evidence, eyewitness accounts, and Chikatilo's own chilling confessions. They painted a picture of a calculated and ruthless killer who preyed on the most vulnerable members of society, taking sadistic pleasure in their suffering. The defense team, tasked with the unenviable job of defending the indefensible, argued that Chikatilo was mentally ill and not responsible for his actions. They pointed to his troubled childhood, his history of head injuries, and his erratic behavior as evidence of his insanity. However, their arguments failed to sway the jury, who had heard and seen enough to recognize the depths of Chikatilo's depravity. Section 3: A nation gripped public reaction and the shadow of doubt. The trial of Andrei Chikatilo captivated the attention of the entire nation. For years the Soviet Union had been shrouded in secrecy, the true extent of the Rostov Rippers' crimes hidden from public view. The trial, broadcast on television and covered extensively in the press, brought the horrors of Chikatilo's crimes into sharp focus. Public reaction was a mixture of horror, disgust, and outrage. People were appalled by the sheer brutality of the murders and the fact that such a monster had been able to operate undetected for so long. The trial forced the nation to confront its own dark underbelly, exposing the failings of a system that had allowed such atrocities to occur. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, some segments of the public expressed doubt about Chikatilo's guilt. Conspiracy theories flourished, fueled by a deep-seated distrust of the authorities and a belief that the truth was being concealed. Some argued that Chikatilo was a scapegoat, a convenient fall guy for crimes committed by others, possibly even members of the government. The authorities, eager to quell any unrest, went to great lengths to ensure transparency during the trial. They allowed international observers to attend the proceedings and provided access to court documents and evidence. However, for some, the shadow of doubt lingered, a testament to the deep-seated mistrust that permeated Soviet society at the time. Section 4: Final Judgment, Verdict, and Execution. After months of testimony, the jury reached a verdict. On October 14, 1992, Andrei Chikatilo was found guilty of 52 murders. The court sentenced him to death, bringing closure to a terrorized nation. The judge described Chikatilo as a sadist who deserved no mercy. The sentence was met with applause from the gallery. Chikatilo showed little emotion as the verdict was read. His appeals were denied, and on February 14, 1994, he was executed. The execution marked the end of a dark chapter in Soviet history.